Hello, and welcome to Learning Outcome Leaders, brought to you by Genio.
I'm James.
And I'm Scott, and on this podcast, you'll hear us chatting to higher education professionals who can talk the talk about how they've been there and done it.
We'll discuss some of their proudest and most ambitious projects and explore the most effective ways in which they've helped to improve and elevate their students' experience. In this episode, we'll talk to Jennifer Balman, Administrative Coordinator at Riverside City College, about an often overlooked equity issue, how physical classroom environments can create barriers for students of size. We also take a deep dive into the future of AI regulation and how to balance academic integrity with student support. Want to find out more? Let's get into the episode.
So, hey Jennifer, really lovely to meet you and have you on the podcast. As we start all of these podcasts, we start with a very particular question, and we are so interested about your origin story. So, if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into education and any formative educational experiences you've had, which motivated the move to work in education.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. This is my first podcast, so I'm very excited to see where we go from here. My origin story. Well, I kind of grew up not knowing what I wanted to do. And so I was like, when I'm getting my education, I'm just going to stick with business. Business is somewhat general, right? Can kind of go into different industries. And so I got my bachelor's from the University of Redlands in business. And then I'm like, okay, what am I going to do for a job? You know, graduated during the downturn in the United States, 2009, kind of hard to find anything. So I started going back to school for certifications and I started working as a student worker because I was like, okay, little money on the side, right? And I just found out that I really loved it. So I started working at Moreno Valley College and Riverside Community College. So they're both community colleges. And there was something about working with the students, even though I was a student as well. I felt that I really had a passion to work with them in tutoring or helping them navigate like student services and things like that. And I'm like, maybe this is my passion. Maybe this is it. But it was really hard to get into that industry. It's really actually hard to start getting into actually getting hired in higher education. So I continued my education, went and worked for a safety company for some time, became a manager, but I still really wanted to kind of go back and see what it was like to work in higher education as a full-time employee. So I applied on and off, especially at RCC because then that's Riverside Community College, because I wanted to first, I really liked the location. There was these little thing called the Wood Streets that I actually now live in. And it's just these cute old houses, like mine's 1913 Craftsman's house.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, that's 3 minutes down the road. RCC's like, it's right there. And then just in general, higher education has, especially RCC, when I researched it, had a lot of great benefits, very good pay. And that's something we look for, right? To make sure that we're living, quality of life. And so on and off, a little under 10 years, I applied, not consistently. And I finally got a job as administrative coordinator for business services. Not my most ideal job, but something that really got my foot in the door. And again, business services was my education. And so I started there. And then from there, my world opened up. It was just the things I found out that is possible at community colleges was even further than I thought. I was given opportunities to be part of committees and council work, and that's our participatory governance, where we get to be in part of the, we have a mixture of classified administration and faculty usually on most committees. And when I say classified, I mean classified professionals, and that's how we refer to staff as here. It's something that California has. It's a word that we now use. And I was just like, again, like my eyes open to the possibilities of how I could be involved. I didn't realize I could do something other than my actual job, and that's what it was like. And from there, from that opportunities, one of the key opportunities that I really appreciated was being part of the Equity Minded Learning Institute. There, I found my passion for making sure that we're providing services for students, and make sure with an equity lens, right, that we're serving all students in the way that they need in their particular journeys. It's funny from there, for that, I had finally gotten my MBA kind of during this time. I'm like, okay, I'll go back. Everybody was like, go back, get your degree. And then from there, though, I actually put together, so for this institute, right, it was a year-long institute, and we learned just a variety of topics, but everything with an equity lens. And I kind of found my passion, my personal passion, and it was about seating equity for students of size. It's not something commonly talked about, and but it is an equity and access issue. And so I just started doing research, and I found out a lot of information. First of all, it's not really studied all that much, but there's very few, not much information, but some things are on the horizon when it comes to it. And I'm like, oh, this is a great topic. So I did my little end of the year presentation, and I wasn't sure how it was going to be received because it's a very unique, somewhat sensitive topic. And I mean, the amount of support I received, the amount of people said, we didn't even realize, even as faculty, what can we do? And so it was a really good start of my kind of personal journey of my actually starting my dissertation. I'm a year and a half in, I have another year and a half, and my dissertation's about that specific topic. And I just wrote my chapter 1, so I'm very excited. So that's kind of my personal journey. And then through that council work, I found out about conferences. And I was like, I want to go to a conference. I know I'm just classified, because that kind of happens. You see administrators always going right, but not often classified professionals. And I finally got to go to them, and I just was amazed. I was just so excited. I went to all different kinds, the Classified Learning Institute, the California Community College League, or the Community College League of California. I mean, I went to so many professional development, and I was so excited. And every time I'd come back, I'm like, okay, here's my idea. This person had a great presentation. We should do something with it. And everybody's like, you really like to bring things back. I'm like, that's the whole point of going to conferences, right? I mean, you should be able to bring something back and utilize it at your college. Well, there was one presentation about AI, and this was kind of the start of it, right? Especially generative AI. And that, again, my horizons had been open, and I'm like, this is amazing. So I brought it back, and they're like, hey, this is really good. No one's really talking about this. You need to present on it. And so I put something together, presented at RCC. Everyone was ecstatic, like, oh my gosh, we're not talking about it. It's kind of like a secret thing we're not really supposed to use. And I'm like, no, totally use it. We need to start talking about it. And that kind of led to me applying to present at the conferences I went to. And now I've been doing that for the past few years. And that's my other avenue of just enjoyment and excitement, because it's such an important topic. And it's something we need to be talking about, because it's happening no matter what. And there's goods and bads. I'm not saying it's all fairy tales and, rainbows and stuff like that, but it is very important that we talk about it, because it'll be our lives will be ingrained into AI. So that's kind of my two journeys that I have experienced at my introduction of getting into working in higher education and also getting my education.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where we met for the listeners. Myself and Jennifer met at a conference in Anaheim, where I went to one of Jennifer's talks, and it was really amazing actually to sit in the room sort of from a personal standpoint, because with our job we talk about AI and education a lot. That's a fundamental part of our daily conversations, but being in a room with people that are either just starting to sort of understand what AI is and what it can mean in the future, the pros as well as the cons, and some of the challenges that we're going to have. It was a really fascinating conversation to be a part of that you were facilitating. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. I think, Scott, did you have a question before I jump into anything else?
Yeah, you really piqued my interest when you mentioned about your work about students of size, and that's super interesting, because we do a lot of work, obviously supporting students from lots of different backgrounds, which have many different struggles. Um, we do a lot of work into like what the new majority learner is, and how like non-traditional learners have changed. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work into students of size.
Yeah, so while in EMLI, which is the Equity Minded Learning Institute, that was when I first started the research, and I just finding out how much it affects student success. And it's, first of all, it's a both a personal and kind of emotional journey when doing that, because I have been a student of size. for the majority of my life. And, the feeling is, well, this is my fault. So there's not much I can do. Not everything can be accommodated, right? But we know now that we accommodate a lot of different aspects of students, no matter what it is, right? And it's something that is a statistical fact. I mean, when doing research, we talk about in the United States, like 48%, I believe. I'm not exactly remembering the statistics, but somewhere around there is that people are considered obese. Overweight is more like 60 something percent. And I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but it is a thing that has happened. It is a fact. It is something that we deal with in our daily lives, be it that it's, metabolic reasons, psychologic, whatever it may be, physical. There's a lot of different reasons. And so beyond the health part of it, it is something that we're seeing in our population, especially in community colleges and especially disproportionately amongst our students of color. You know what I mean? So we're seeing that even their percentages go up. And so when we think about going into the classroom and we're talking about, we've heard different words, combination desk or sleigh desk. I've heard all different ones, but the ones where the desk is attached to the seat in essence, I still see that at RCC, and I see that in a lot of different colleges that I've talked to. And that is just not a conducive for really active learning in general. One, the discomfort, even for anybody of size, right? The second, for people that can't fit into it, right? My personal journey is going to class early to pick out my seat and say, okay, do they have an, ADA, compliant seat that I can sit in? But then I'm kind of in the front of the seat and now everybody's going to watch me as someone that can't fit in those seats. Or if you can, but then you're uncomfortable and you're focusing on the physical part of you being there instead of the education part. And that's why it's such an important thing, is that it's part of that learning. And there is that flexible seating, hybrid seating that's coming out, but a lot of times student sides are not considered when it comes to that. You know what I mean? It's they consider people that need movement, right? Be able to cross your legs, things like that. There's certain parts, but not. I sat in those seats and they're so uncomfortable for me as a person of size. So it's just something we need to think about, because it's a population that we're not talking about, and it's kind of like a silent problem because it's an uncomfortable problem. It's something kind of hard to talk about, right? Like the word fat is considered bad, but in a lot of the studies, there's literally a journal article or a theory called fat studies, because it's a thing and it's a word that we need to accept that it's not always bad. It's just a fact. And it's something we need to consider for our students when it's disproportionately affecting a lot of people and their success in college. We're talking about dropping out because of their uncomfortability. We're talking about being excluded in group projects. People feel that sometimes fat people are lazy or things like that, their preconceived notions. So again, it's really ingrained in our classroom experience without even, and a lot of people don't realize it. That was what the faculty came to me and said, thank you so much. It wasn't even something I thought about.
It's really interesting when you talk about that, because as Scott mentioned, we talk about non-traditional students being this new majority of learners, particularly in community colleges that are full of first generation students, ESL learners and things. But this seemed like another example of that new majority, when it is 60% of students are being classified as overweight or obese. This is something that is affecting most students on campus. And you mentioned that there's studies that are starting to come out or in progress and things. I wondered, is there sort of any links being made or studies happening at the moment that is linking this to grade outcomes and stress and dropout and things like that already? Or is that some of the work that maybe you're going to be looking at to be able to provide that business case for change?
There is very few. There are some, though. There are some that connect the student experience, especially as a student of size, and their learning outcomes, their success in class, their success in graduation, their success in group projects, their success communicating with the teacher, and every aspect of it. But it's kind of very disjointed.
Yeah.
After my research, and a lot of them tend to be a little more quantitative. I decided to do a more qualitative approach and really get the perspective of the students. So my plan is to interview students past and present, because we've all experienced it, especially if you're a person of size. And to figure out, what did it make you feel like? What was your experiences? What are something maybe that this is the time you get to talk about it, that you never really get to talk about it for, because at the time it was a taboo conversation, right? Because it's a very uncomfortable conversations, like other conversations may be. But it's a conversation that we tended to go, well, that's not really my problem. You know what I mean? That's your problem. You kind of did it to yourself. That's the feeling that some people get, you know. And no matter the background of it, that doesn't matter. We're here to accommodate students. We're here to make sure they're successful. So it's something we need to consider, especially when it comes to access and inclusion, right? Because again, even thinking about that perspective of what other students think of that person and saying, you know, just put a group together. Guess what? I was not often picked for a group, you know what I mean? So that sometimes is maybe not the way, or hey, let's go take a little walk around campus and do this for our class. And, you know, might be biology, looking at the plants, blah, blah. That's great. But what about mobility issues, you know, and things like that? Just things to consider, especially as faculty, but even as classified, remembering that the awkward seating. I mean, even when it comes to in my college right now, when I'm going to events and it's in a classroom, I have to go look at the classroom to see if there's a place I can sit, and sometimes there's not. And so I know if I'm going to this event or this workshop, whatever it may be, I'm either standing or I have to make some kind of a comment. You know, I have to ask if a chair can be provided for me. So I have to do all this prep work that no one's ever really thought about. And then there's other classrooms that have seating that's available for everybody that in general can accommodate the majority, because it's very hard to accommodate everybody, but at least the majority. So it's just, you know, concepts that we got to start putting in our brains that no one's really thought about.
I it's the reason why it interests me a lot is because I think like I was a first gen graduate. I have dyslexia, and I think when we look at like dropout, like retention, persistence for students, I think there's so much underlying stigma or shame that comes into it when you're not a traditional student. Whereas we know now that like many students are like most students are not traditional students, but there's still that shame and stigma there that makes you feel that like maybe I shouldn't be here. And like I've never really thought about like a personal size feeling that as well. So that's super interesting. What are you doing? Like what's a challenge in getting people to listen to you and to say that like this is a thing, this is a thing that we should be talking about, we should be addressing? What are the challenges that come in?
So just to kind of go back a little bit, once I completed my little presentation about that, and you know, in essence, I said like, you know, seating for everybody, right? There's a lot of interest in like let's take you on the road, let's have you present on our leadership councils, right? Present to, you know, all the VPs, the deans and stuff like that. And so I kind of took the show on the road and presented. One of the challenges was just the topic in general. Maybe my EMLI cohort, you know, colleagues were very accepting of it because we were talking about equity the whole time, right? We were talking about acceptance and student outcomes related to that equity lens. But I wasn't sure how everybody else was going to really, you know, accept it. How not accept it, but receive it. Let me say, I wasn't sure how everybody was going to receive it. And so going on that, I got really positive responses, but there was some of that silence. I don't know what to do with this. So there's that challenge of, okay, it's a problem. What can we do? And then there's a challenge of, but what can RCC actually do? So I had one dean that said, I love this. Thank you so much for making this. What do we need to do? Go talk to the director of business services. Let's find some funding. Let's change seating and blah, blah. And that's a great idea. And that's a great, I'm so happy they're enthusiastic, but it's not realistic. It's not instantaneous, because then we're talking about you know, FTES. So we're talking about students and seats, how much money we're getting from our government related to how many students we can educate, right? And so when we talk about changing up seating, blah, blah, when they're doing HyFlex and flexible classrooms, they still want to maintain the amounts of seats that there are. If we're talking about accommodate, we need to talk about what that looks like for students of size, because if we lose seats, we lose some of that funding. So there's those complications in the actual application and implementation of this, right? So there's going to be conversations with facilities. There's going to be conversations with the vice president of business services and conversations with students, you know, academic affairs when it comes to FTES and maintaining that. And what does that look like? Maybe that changes, you know, in years and years and years from now, that whole thing changes, realizing maybe that's not a good marker, a measure, right? Because look what it's doing. It's not allowing us to accommodate every student. So the challenge is, what are we going to do with this? That's where I'm worried. I don't want to have this presentation that I present to everybody and then getting my dissertation, writing my dissertation on it, getting a degree on it, and then it just nothing happens with it. I want something to happen. So the challenge is what can be done. And those are a lot of conversations that are going to have to happen in the future. I hope to be involved. I hope to honestly, this would be the new topic. I mean, AI is super important and I'm always going to be involved in it. But this would be the topic that I'm going to bring around to the next set of conferences because I think it's important because, again, like you guys mentioned, it's just not something a lot of people think about. And so that'll be the challenge of what does implementing this actually look like?
It's super interesting that you mentioned HyFlex. I've been having a lot of conversations with people recently about, the creation of HyFlex classrooms and how we make students online feel included and part of the student experience. But actually, what you're saying is that there's students that are in person that we would traditionally look at and say, these are the students that are having the best traditional experience currently, but those might be the students that are feeling the most uncomfortable in the classroom. And the point of, well, if we change the infrastructure inside, well, that might mean that we're losing seats in the classroom. That's going to be a really fine balance and to get that funding. Traditionally, if we look at changing furniture in a classroom, there's often funding through the ADA for a disability. But if something isn't classified as an accommodation, where can we find that money from? So it's a really interesting dilemma, I guess, in that sense. And I wonder if you've sort of had any experience of or heard anything around sort of HyFlex. Is that something that students of size have felt more comfortable with online learning as a result? Is there sort of a push for more remote learning, or is it actually that push of we want to make sure that equity of access is on campus? I want to be on campus. I want to feel like I'm able to be in the classroom with my peers and things like that. Have you sort of had any conversations or experiences with that?
Not as much. I did take a survey when I was in UMLI of our classified professionals through our union. That's how I got some of my data.
Okay.
And the data was very overwhelming. You know, obviously when looking at people, I was like, I don't really know how many people of size are here that, are going to really, and I don't want the data to show that I'm right. I want the data to show what's accurate. So I thought, it might be maybe not what I'm thinking, because of course it's a personal experience of mine, and so it's evident in my everyday life. But I don't know what it's like. But then the comments, the data was overwhelming. How much they said, no, this is a real problem, and it affects events I go to. It affects how I go to school and how I choose to go to school. So I don't have as much data on, especially like online compared to in person. I know that in general, when talking about student data, that online was preferred in general. But then I've also seen a wave of we really need to get back to the classroom because we have these other students that are like, this is how I learn, which I completely understand. I was not an online learner. It was really hard for me to switch over, and now I'm so used to it. It's like now I can't even imagine honestly going back to the classroom. But but before I was like, no, this is the only way to learn, right? But we learned something different. So I don't have a lot of data on when it comes to what students are talking about, especially students of size when it comes to that. I know that our HyFlex at RCC is very more technology, right? A lot more like where you can be remote and also in class at the same time. And, there's some functionality problems, and some things work and some things don't. Now we have the digital whiteboards, and some people like it, some people don't, because now we got size and visually, and you can't change up and down. And now we have people that are shorter and taller. There's always going to be a problem that arises because it is hard. It's acceptable to say it's hard to think of everybody. It's very hard to think of every perspective and every decision and choice that we make. And even when it comes to, like you mentioned, the ADA and getting them involved in those decisions, it's like it's not a protected class. What's a protected class is any elements that come from being obese or overweight, but not actually the fact that you are. So that's also that part of it. Now we also have, the World Health Organization that's saying it is a disease, it's classified as a disease. But again, there's that stigma of, even research when it comes to people with obesity, and we're talking about those, what is it, the GLPs and all the Ozempics and all the things out there. We're starting to really start researching what does it mean for someone to be overweight, and what does it really take for someone to to address it, right? So I'm excited to see what the research says, because I feel like we're finally in a phase where we're going to learn more about it, instead of just kind of saying this is on the wayside. It's kind of just is what it is. But I know that personally that working online has been a huge difference for me. It's a anxiety I no longer have to endure when it comes to getting my education, at least. And it's not even something I even thought about when it was happening. I was thinking about the learning, the I won't have access to the teacher and blah blah. And we figured those things out once we kind of started doing hybrid and things like that. Um, but the physical part of it was like it wasn't even clicked to me. I'm like, oh, this is why I'm learning so much better. I'm not thinking about how I look in this chair. I'm not thinking about, am I going to be the last to pick? I'm not thinking about you know what I mean, like getting to class early and things like that. It just completely changed my educational experience, and without even realizing it until starting this research.
That's fantastic. I think what one of the reasons why I asked that, we had a fantastic talk with somebody recently, Amanda Hagman, who has done a lot of research at Utah State University, and it was the link between the sense of belonging that a student feels and then their how often they're then retaining at the college year on year, and the piece of work that they did was find out that if a student goes to one sport event, whether that be a football game, basketball, volleyball, it didn't matter. As long as they went to one game, they were exponentially more likely to persist at the university because they had that sense of belonging, and that was the best way to do that. To do that, you have to be on campus. You have to feel part of that, and I think that that sort of sense of belonging can come in a lot of different ways. And I know I feel a lot more belonging to a company or to anything when I'm there in person, and so being able to make someone feel comfortable and feel like they belong, not like they are a burden or things have to be changed because of them, can is I think is so important for those students. I guess if you were to sort of look at other people at another institution that might want to sort of start this sort of project, to start looking into this, to start researching, what sort of conversations would they need to have on campus? What what would you sort of recommend to start those conversations about? Is this something that we need to look at, and then how do we address that sort of thing?
Well, and that's kind of a tricky part too, because one, we want to involve the students, but there is that part of it that some students might not want to be involved, right? That this might be an awkward conversation for them. So there's a delicate part of this process that I couldn't really say what's the right answer at this point. If someone came to, honest, like I found out that when I first got hired, there was conversation with my boss with someone else saying, "Hey, should I address any kind of seating, any kind of special seating she might need?" Right? And they're like, "Yeah, that's a legit question. It's fair. If there's any kind of seat you need, is there any kind of accommodation you need?" My boss never had that conversation with me, and I don't fault him for that at all in any way. But I get it. I understand that. Who knows how I would have reacted if I was asked, maybe someone else wasn't going to ask, right? I know for me, I'm okay with that. So there's that aspect of being sensitive and trying to figure out like your environment, your what your culture is, and if that's something that you feel that you can do. So one is including either students or people, even people of size that have experienced this to begin with, in the conversations. I mean, if you're going to talk about any kind of facilities, especially within the classroom being changed or in event spaces, right? We have like, stadium seating, right, at like our auditoriums or whatever it is, and then those even being uncomfortable or things like that, right, or being predetermined in size and the sidebars and all that stuff. We need to start, if we're already trying to include all these other perspectives of things of how people learn, how people absorb information. This is just another aspect we need to start considering. So if we're going to have a checklist of things, here's the things that we should consider. This is how people learn: visual, auditory, height, people that have something that may give them attention deficit, whatever it may be. This is the other marker that then we need to put on there, and then figure out how we're going to include this perspective, because to be honest, it is very unique to people that have this situation. And so it is going to have to be someone that has lived this experience. But again, it's that sensitivity of how to include it. But we're also, we're colleges, we're universities, we're higher education. We talk about a lot of uncomfortable topics, you know what I mean? And things that have become normalized for us that you would never talk about in a private sector, right? And so this is the time to do it and the space to do it.
I think that's the big thing, right? Is having the conversation is the first step to making some change or making people listen, is to just saying something, just speaking up. I'm gonna take a little bit of a tangent, kind of based on what you've just on what you've just said. But so you sorry, you have business skills, right? A business education. I'm really interested when we look at like transferable skills. How have you moved from like taking those business skills to having like these conversations in higher education, and making those moves between roles in higher education as well?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I guess I never really thought about that. There's a lot of strategy in the way I present. There's a lot of strategy even in the way I talk. Um, because I really want to make sure that I'm thinking about as many perspectives as I can so that when I am communicating, that it's something that anybody can to receive. You know what I mean? There's that aspect of just that communication and strategy and how we're having a conversation so that that what I'm saying is taking as an important topic. Because as a classified professional, I will be super honest, and personally in our college, and I've seen a lot of community colleges just because I've been to conferences with specifically classified, we're a little bit on the lower part of the totem pole. You know what I mean? We got kind of faculty and students up here, administration, and then classified. And so sometimes our voices are a little lower. Sometimes we're not at the table. Now, I will say specifically, RCC has done great leaps of making sure to include us a lot more, seeing that that was a problem, right? That was an inequity for a certain particular employee group. And so they have gone above and beyond to really include us and to start seeing us as more of an equal. But that's just a reality of community colleges. Can't really say for universities since I haven't worked there. But with that aspect, I feel like, our voices have been risen and our perspectives have become more important because what I've been telling everybody is operations, that is us. We are the operations. And yes, classroom is so important. We could not have higher education. We couldn't be part of higher education if we didn't have the classroom and faculty. But guess what? We couldn't have it without the classified and daily operations. So when it comes to even being that strategic, that how I communicate when it comes to, hey, see this process, I do this every day. And now you created a new process without any of our input. How do you think that's going to work for you? It's not going to be great. You know what I mean? Because I have seen it happen. And even though we're all trying to all listen to us, we still get that pushback of, hey, you're a classified. I don't think you understand. We're kind of up here. We know how it's going to work. I'm like, okay, go ahead and implement that. Oh, 5 months later, oh, it's not working. Okay, here's how you should do it. So, and I'm not trying to say that I know better than anybody else. I'm saying that when it comes to operationalizing certain things, especially within my job, I know how it should be done. I know what it looks like. I have that perspective of people coming to me with the problems, right? People coming to me with here's a workaround I found. People coming to me saying, I'm so lost. Can you train me? Can you help me? And that's something I've always prided myself on, is becoming that trainer, that mentor, because I feel like in a lot of the few jobs that I've had, that's something that was always lacking, is someone really like, who can I call when I have this question? And I want to be that person because I don't want anybody to feel the way that I felt when it came to starting, my career, especially in higher education, when I feel like the stakes felt so much higher. I mean, this is student success, right? So through that, I feel like because of one, how the best way I can communicate, the best way I can present the facts, make sure I make my case, right? I'm not coming here with emotion, and it's okay to have emotion, but I'm saying I'm not coming here just based off emotion and how I feel. Here's the facts. Here's what the classified have said. Here, I'll have letters full of people saying, hey, here's the problems. Please don't continue this. We need to fix this before we do this. Here's what students have been experienced. Because again, we get those stories. We're the ones that get those stories. And so that is really part of my business skills that I've used, is try to elevate the classified voice, and also finding a strategy on how to do it more effectively. So they understand, like, oh, no, you're right. I'm like, yeah, you do. Just like you need the student's perspective. Now a lot of the classified have been the students, right? I was a student of RCC and stuff like that. But even having the current student's perspective is important. And in our participatory governance and our council and committees, we have students in every committee, because it's important that we're listening to them too. That's a winning strategy to me. So just that aspect, I think, is kind of what comes to mind when you ask that question, because I'm like, that's kind of a hard question. But that's kind of what came to mind, is just knowing how to present something so that that people will actually listen and take acceptance that, oh, maybe you're right, maybe this is the right way. And guess what, sometimes I'm wrong, and that's okay too. Sometimes I'm like, I only know this perspective though, and you have this kind of whole branch of, oh, all the things, I know this part of it, and that's okay, but this part of it is still important.
That it's actually super interesting. So me and James are account executives here at Junior, as well as doing the podcast. So we're arguably business minded as well. And I see so many transferable skills that we can use, and when we have these conversations within education. So that's why I was super interested in learning, like, how you have used those transferable skills. For instance, for us, when anybody is interested in Genio, we are always the first to say, let us talk to other people about Genio, so you can do your job, and we can focus. So you can focus on your job, and we can do what we do. And I think sharing those skills with people and helping people learn those skills, and knowing that they're available is really, really useful. Can I ask anybody, what would you say to anybody who was trying to make the switch and trying to move into higher education for the first time? What advice would you give them?
um Persistence. Don't give up. I've had a lot of people where I'm like, I sing the praises of higher education. I really do, because I just think in general, it's a great career to be a part of, and the satisfaction of helping people, like, you see it on the daily. And I don't have a super student facing job, but in all my community work, I get to see those students and how our initiatives and our conversations actually become successful and become better for the students, right? But I've had people and friends, I'm like, oh, you should apply for this and blah blah, and they're like, oh, I didn't even get an interview, and they're like, so I'm not going to ever do it again. I'm like, no, no, no. That is, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's common in Rose, but I can tell you right now in California, that is common. That is common. It took me 10 years. You cannot use this one rejection to say, I'll never want to do it again. One, that just persistence of if it's something you really want to do, please continue, because it's not personal. A lot of times there's a lot of things in the background we don't know why and what they're looking for. So don't take that as a personal thing of why you might have gotten rejected the first time. And guess what? All the positions I applied to before, there were a lot less money, a lot more of the kind of a beginning phase of a career, and this was a little more advanced, and I took a chance, and there you go, I got it. So, like, I got the one that I was like, oh, this is kind of, out of all of them, probably the better one at this point. The other thing is that if I I do personally feel that it is not just a job. We are literally, yeah, that's the hard part. I think I would recommend that if you're just looking to go to work and leave, and to not really insert yourself in the company, wherever it may be, and that's fine. That is a way. I'm not saying that's wrong in any way, but I think in higher education that's really hard to do, and actually do your job right, because this is about student success. This is about students graduating and preparing them for a career, preparing them for the real world, right? Especially in community colleges, where it's kind of that transition of high school still mentality into, at one point, transferring to university or Cal State or whatever it may be. But it is, what is the word? It's people work. It's very much even a step beyond customer service, because that one interaction is not going to end just because they leave there. It's going to be continuous over and over again. And one bad experience could literally have them dropping out. We have heard stories, like, I was in missions of records and they were just kind of rude, and I wasn't sure. And I'm not saying our people, I'm saying stories I've heard. And I just felt like I just didn't know what to do. And I gave up. I just stopped trying. You know what I mean? The application process was complicated. I couldn't find anybody to help me. And it might be that, or a counselor told me this, it was the wrong information. And now I have another whole year of extra time I have to go because of bad advice. And I just feel like I need to give up. And then life happens, right? There's all different reasons. But those few bad experiences can mean literally succeeding or not for students. So this is very much a more involved thing. I think that every time I go to work, I know that it's not just a job for me, it's literally changing people's lives. And so if you want to work in higher education, please take that into perspective, because it's going to be very hard for you to remove that emotional, personal side of it, because it really is part of it. Because education is scary and it's hard. Even for me, you know what I mean? Like I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, but I keep going back to school for things and I'm like, I hate this. And then I leave, I'm like, I really love that. I should do it again. You know what I mean? But when I have those bad experiences, it's really demoralizing and it's really hard to pick myself back up. So my big thing is, please know that I would hope that if you get into higher education, that it's really more than a job, especially for students, that it can affect the rest of their lives.
We find that a lot. Obviously, our job not actually being within a higher education institution itself, but directly working on something that's going to try and support students. And me and Scott have this conversation often, where we're acutely aware of the impact that everything within higher education can have on a student, whether that's something on campus, somebody, a member of staff at the cafeteria is slightly rude to a student, it puts them off their rhythm. They're not concentrating in that class. They then miss one small tiny thing and in an exam and things like that. That knock-on effect and the sort of the importance of putting people first in higher education, I think, is more than most other sectors, and we love that. We get to build fantastic relationships with staff and students across higher education more than you would in other sectors. I think it's quite a nice thing to end on. I think in that message of, if you want to be in higher ed, you need to love people and you need to love supporting people in that sense. Jennifer, this has been a really, really brilliant conversation. You really opened our eyes to new challenges that students face. A really, widespread challenge that's an experience of a lot of students, and so we really appreciate you taking the time today. I'm sure we'd love to have you on again once you've finished this research piece. We'd love to hear about your findings and some of that qualitative research that you'll have gathered. So please do come back and tell us your findings, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you at conferences talking about this over the coming years as well. Jennifer, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the experience and being able to kind of shine light on something that's not often talked about. So I appreciate your receptiveness to it, and the way the conversation went felt very natural, and I appreciated your the comfort that you gave me in being able to talk about something so personal, but also should be public and should be something that we talk about. So thank you again so much. It was a great experience, and I definitely will be back once all my research is done and I have something else we can do and some initiatives that we need to start implementing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us on Learning Outcome Leaders. We hope you found the conversation valuable and that it gave you some ideas for how you can elevate your own student experience.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Until next time, have an amazing day.